The dust swirled around Rose Everhart's skirts as she crashed to the ground, the sting of her father's words cutting deeper than the rocky earth beneath her palms. "You're dead to me, girl, dead as your sinful mother." His voice boomed across the main street of Central City, Colorado, drawing the attention of every passerby on that sweltering August afternoon in 1876. Rose's cheeks burned with humiliation as she struggled to rise. Her elegant blue dress, the one she'd sewn by hand for her 20th birthday, now stained with the dirt of the street. The townsfolk stared, some with pity, others with the hungry curiosity that fed the town's gossip mill for weeks on end. "Get up and crawl back to that saloon where you belong." Her father snarled, his face contorted with rage, the Bible he'd been clutching now pointed at her like a weapon. "No daughter of mine works serving drinks to sinners and gamblers." Rose had expected anger when her father discovered she'd taken a job as a hostess at the Silver Dollar to help pay off the family's mounting debts her father's failing ranch and growing whiskey habit had created. What she hadn't expected was being disowned in the middle of Central City's busiest thoroughfare. "Mr. Everhart, that's enough." The deep voice cut through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Rose looked up through tear-blurred vision to see a tall figure step between her and her father. The sun silhouetted him from behind, casting his face in shadow, but she recognized the distinctive Stetson hat and broad shoulders of Xavier Ironwood, a cowboy who'd ridden into town just a month prior. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy," her father spat. "This ungrateful harlot has made her choice." Xavier didn't move. "Her choice was to work honest hours to pay your debts, sir." His voice remained calm but carried a steel edge that made even Rose's father step back. "I watched her count out every cent of her earnings to the bank yesterday to keep your mortgage current." Her father's face reddened further. "How dare you? No, sir. How dare you?" Xavier knelt beside Rose, his back to her father, and offered her his hand. His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-bronzed skin, met hers. Her father threw her to the dust, he said loudly enough for all to hear, then spoke more gently just for her. "Then I'll lift you from it." The moment his calloused palm met hers, Rose felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. She allowed him to help her to her feet, acutely aware of the whispers rippling through the crowd. "You take her then," her father shouted, backing away. "You'll see what kind of daughter she is when she brings shame to your door too." Xavier kept his eyes on Rose, not dignifying her father's outburst with a response. "Are you hurt, Miss Everhart?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "Only my pride," she answered, brushing at her skirts. She couldn't bring herself to look at the townspeople watching them. "Pride heals," he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question caught her off guard. The reality of her situation crashed over her like ice water. She couldn't go home. "Not now, maybe not ever again. I have a room above the saloon," she managed, her voice smaller than she wanted. "Part of my arrangement with Mr. Sullivan." Something flickered across Xavier's face, concern, perhaps. "The Silver Dollar isn't a place for a lady to live alone." "I don't have much choice now, do I, Mr. Ironwood?" She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, I'm apparently no lady, according to half the town already." Xavier glanced around at the dispersing crowd, many of whom still watched them from beneath the brims of hats or behind shop windows. "What if I offered you another choice?" Rose stiffened. She'd received offers from men before, especially since starting at the saloon. "I'm not in need of that kind of assistance, Mr. Ironwood." To her surprise, he chuckled. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Everhart, a respectable one. I purchased the old Crawford homestead last week. It needs a housekeeper, and I need someone who can cook better than I can, which is just about anyone with working hands." "You want me to be your housekeeper?" Rose couldn't hide her skepticism. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're hardworking. I know you're honest, and I know you deserve better than what just happened here." He gestured to where her father had stood. "The house has 2 bedrooms on opposite sides. You'd have your privacy and your reputation would remain intact. Better than living above a saloon, I reckon." Rose hesitated. The offer was unexpected and she had to admit, tempting. Working at the saloon had been her last resort, and while Mr. Sullivan ran a cleaner establishment than most, the constant propositions and wandering hands of drunken patrons wore on her nightly. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally. Xavier's expression softened. "Because someone once helped me when I was down in the dust," he offered his arm. "What do you say? I can take you to gather your things now if you'd like." Rose looked around at the town that had been her home for all 20 years of her life, at the faces that had watched her father disown her without a single word of protest. Then she looked at Xavier Ironwood, a man she barely knew, offering her something no one else had: dignity. "Yes," she said, taking his arm. "I accept." The whispers followed them as they walked together toward the silver dollar, but for the first time since her mother's death 3 years ago, Rose felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The Crawford homestead sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, 3 miles outside Central City. As Xavier guided his wagon up the winding dirt road, Rose took in her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The 2-story wooden structure needed work that much was evident even from a distance, but it had good bones, as her mother would have said. "It's not much yet," Xavier commented, noting her appraisal. "The Crawfords let it fall into disrepair before they moved back east. But the roof doesn't leak, and the hearth draws well." Rose nodded, clutching her small carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world. After collecting her meager possessions from the saloon and explaining her departure to a surprisingly understanding Mr. Sullivan, she had little left to show for her 2 decades of life. "How long have you owned it?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. "Just over a week. I've been staying in the room above the livery until the paperwork was finalized." He guided the horses to a stop before the front porch. "Been meaning to find someone to help get it in order." Rose suspected this last part wasn't entirely truthful. The timing seemed too convenient, Xavier purchasing a homestead and suddenly needing a housekeeper just when she found herself homeless. But his kindness, regardless of its timing, wasn't something she could afford to question. The house revealed more of its character as Xavier showed her around. The downstairs consisted of a modest parlor, a kitchen with an iron stove, and a small dining area. Upstairs, as promised, were 2 bedrooms connected by a short hallway. "This one would be yours," he said, opening the door to the smaller of the rooms. It contained a narrow bed, a dresser with a wash basin atop it, and a window that looked out toward the mountains to the west. "It's not fancy, but it's lovely," Rose interrupted, surprising herself with her sincerity. After sharing a room with her younger sisters for years and then the cramped quarters above the saloon, having a space of her own, even this modest one felt luxurious. Xavier rubbed the back of his neck, seemingly relieved. "Good, that's good," he cleared his throat. "I'll let you get settled then. There's a pump in the kitchen and firewood stacked out back. I need to see to the horses, but I can bring your trunk up after." "I don't have a trunk," Rose admitted. "Just this." She lifted her carpet bag slightly. Something flickered across Xavier's face, pity perhaps, or concern, but it disappeared quickly. "I see. Well, we can remedy that in time." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "I'll leave you to it then." After he left, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking softly beneath her weight. The room was dusty and in need of a woman's touch, but it was hers. For now, at least. She unpacked her few possessions. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a small daguerreotype of her family taken when her mother was still alive. She placed the photograph on the dresser, angled so that her father's stern face was partially obscured. The sound of Xavier moving about downstairs drifted up to her, the thud of boots on wooden floors, the opening and closing of cupboards. A stranger, she reminded herself. A kind stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. She had traded one uncertain situation for another. Yet as she washed her face in the basin, removing the last traces of dust and tears from her skin, Rose couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, this uncertain situation might lead somewhere better. The next morning, Rose woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of farm life. She dressed quickly in her cleanest dress, a simple brown cotton with modest lace at the collar, and made her way downstairs, determined to prove her worth as a housekeeper on her first day. To her surprise, the kitchen was already warm, a fire crackling in the stove. Xavier stood at the counter slicing bread. "You're up early," she said, pausing in the doorway. He turned, seeming unsurprised to see her. "Force of habit. Cattle don't care if it's dawn or dusk." "You have cattle?" Rose asked, moving to take over the bread slicing. Xavier relinquished the knife. "Not yet, but I've arranged to purchase a small herd from a rancher outside Denver. They'll arrive next week." "You're planning to ranch then?" He nodded. "That's the plan. This land has good water access and enough acreage for a modest operation." Rose moved around the kitchen, familiarizing herself with its layout while preparing a simple breakfast of fried eggs, bacon, and toast. As she worked, she felt Xavier's eyes on her. "You've done this before," he observed. "Since I was tall enough to reach the stove," she replied. "My mother taught me, and after she passed, I took over cooking for my father and sisters." Xavier sat at the small table. "You have sisters, too. Emma is 18 and Sarah is 16. Rose's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Father will likely forbid them from seeing me now. I'm sorry." The simple sincerity in his voice made her look up from the stove. His blue eyes held genuine sympathy, without the judgment she'd grown accustomed to seeing in others. "Thank you." She turned back to the eggs, blinking rapidly. "It's just as well. Emma is to be married next spring to the banker's son, and Sarah has always been father's favorite. They'll be fine without me." "And who will be fine without them?" Xavier asked quietly. Rose didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she served the breakfast and sat across from him, focusing intently on her food. After they'd eaten, Xavier outlined her duties as housekeeper: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general upkeep of the house. In return, she would receive room and board, plus a modest wage paid weekly. "I'll be working the land most days," he explained, "getting fences mended before the cattle arrive. The previous owners left tools and equipment in the barn, so I won't be needing to go into town much." Rose recognized his unstated message. She wouldn't have to face the town's gossip anytime soon. "That's fine. I can make a list of supplies we'll need, though. The pantry is nearly empty. Make your list. I'll ride into town tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "If there's anything personal you need, just add it." The consideration in the offer touched her. "Thank you, Mr. Ironwood." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "If we're to share a home, even in this arrangement, Mr. Ironwood seems unnecessarily formal." "Xavier," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Rose." He nodded, a small smile softening his usually serious expression. "Rose it is." After breakfast, Rose threw herself into cleaning the house. Years of neglect had left every surface covered in dust and grime. She started in the kitchen, scrubbing the cupboards and organizing what few supplies they had. By midday, sweat dampened her dress despite the cool mountain air flowing through the open windows. Xavier returned from the barn around noon, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders from his own labor. He stopped in the doorway, surveying her progress with evident approval. "You've accomplished more in a morning than I would have in a week," he commented, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. Rose pushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "There's still much to do. The floors need scrubbing, the windows washing, and I haven't even started on the upstairs yet." "Don't wear yourself out on the first day," he cautioned. "This place has been neglected for years. It won't be put right in a single day." His consideration surprised her again. Her father would have expected the impossible and berated her for anything less. "I've prepared some cold beef sandwiches for lunch," she said, changing the subject, "from the supplies you had." They ate on the porch, the October air providing relief from their morning exertions. From this vantage point, Rose could see the full extent of Xavier's property: rolling pastures stretching toward distant mountains, a small creek winding through the lower fields, and a stand of aspens whose leaves had turned to gold with the season. "It's beautiful land," she observed. Xavier nodded, his gaze following hers. That's what caught my eye when I first rode through these parts. Good water, good grass, good shelter. He glanced at her. Just needed a good home to complete it. Rose felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words, though she knew he spoke of the homestead, not of anything personal between them. Their arrangement was practical, not romantic. She would do well to remember that. Where did you come from? She asked. Before Central City, I mean. Xavier was silent for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. All over, I suppose. Texas originally, then Kansas, Wyoming, Montana, he shrugged. Never stayed in one place too long. What made you decide to stay here? He looked out at the land again, his expression unreadable. A man gets tired of drifting eventually, starts wanting something that belongs to him. After a pause, he added, and I made a promise to someone that I'd put down roots one day. Rose wanted to ask more, but something in his tone suggested the subject was closed. Instead, she asked, what should I prepare for dinner? Whatever you can manage with what we have, he replied. Tomorrow we'll have better supplies. That evening, Rose prepared a simple stew from the last of the potatoes, carrots, and beef. They ate by lamplight at the kitchen table, the conversation easier than it had been that morning. Xavier told her about his plans for the ranch, the cattle he would raise, the improvements he wanted to make to the house and barn, the crops he hoped to plant come spring. Rose found herself drawn into his vision. It had been so long since she'd heard anyone speak of the future with genuine hope and determination. Her father had become increasingly bitter after her mother's death, seeing only the hardships of frontier life, never its possibilities. You've thought this all through, she remarked as she cleared their dishes. Xavier leaned back in his chair. Had a lot of time to think, riding between jobs. A man's mind wanders when it's just him and his horse for company. And you never married, had a family to bring to this dream of yours. The question slipped out before Rose could consider its propriety. If Xavier was offended by her forwardness, he didn't show it. No, never found the right woman, I suppose, or never stayed in one place long enough to court her properly if I did. Rose nodded, turning to the sink to hide the inexplicable blush that had risen to her cheeks. Well, you have a good start here. The land is promising. It is, he agreed. After a moment he added, and now it has you to help bring it to life. Rose turned back to him, caught off guard by the simple statement and the warmth in his eyes as he said it. I'm just your housekeeper, Xavier. Even so, he said, rising from the table, a house needs a woman's touch to become a home. I've never had much talent for it myself. Before she could respond, he bid her good night and headed upstairs, leaving Rose with the dishes and a strange, unfamiliar feeling in her chest, something between confusion and a cautious, tentative hope. Days turned into weeks as autumn deepened around the Crawford homestead, now the Ironwood Ranch, as Xavier had officially renamed it. Rose settled into a routine, rising early to prepare breakfast, tending to the house during the day, and cooking dinner in the evenings. Xavier worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, clearing fields, and preparing for the arrival of his cattle. True to his word, he had ridden into town the day after Rose's arrival and returned with supplies, not just food for the pantry, but fabric for curtains. A new broom, soap, and several personal items Rose had hesitantly added to her list. A sturdy comb, hairpins, and a bottle of rosewater. The mercantile owner's wife helped me, he'd explained somewhat sheepishly when he presented her with a small package containing not only the items she'd requested, but also ribbons for her hair and a modest bottle of lavender hand cream. Said no woman's toilette was complete without these. The thoughtfulness of the gesture had left Rose speechless. No one, certainly not her father, had considered her comfort or vanity in years. As October gave way to November, the promised cattle arrived, 30 head of sturdy Herefords driven up from Denver by 2 cowboys Xavier had hired for the task. The men stayed only long enough to help settle the herd before riding on, leaving Xavier to manage the animals himself. "Will you hire permanent help?" Rose asked one evening as she treated a deep cut on his hand, the result of a day spent repairing a broken corral post. Xavier winced as she applied iodine to the wound. "Eventually. Not until spring, most likely. Can't afford the wages yet, and the herd's small enough to manage alone through winter." Rose wrapped a clean bandage around his palm, trying not to notice the warmth of his skin or the way his fingers reflexively curled around hers as she secured the cloth. "You work too hard," she said softly. "Says the woman who scrubbed every floorboard in this house and still managed to cook 3 meals a day," he countered with a small smile. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, of mutual respect that had been building steadily over their weeks together. Rose was the first to look away, suddenly aware of how long she'd been holding his hand. "There," she said, releasing him. "Try not to get it wet for a day or so." Xavier flexed his fingers, testing the bandage. "Thank you, you have a gentle touch." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "My mother taught me basic doctoring. You don't live on a farm without learning to tend wounds." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." Rose nodded, putting away the medical supplies. "She was patient, kind, but strong too." "She had to be with my father." "What happened to her?" Xavier asked quietly. Rose hesitated. She rarely spoke of her mother's death, even with her sisters. The pain remained too raw, too entwined with anger at her father's role in it. But something about Xavier's gentle inquiry made her want to share this burden she'd carried alone. "Pneumonia," she said finally. 3 winters ago. Father refused to call the doctor until it was too late, said we couldn't afford it and that prayer would heal her." Her voice grew bitter. "He prayed while she drowned in her own lungs." Xavier's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, Rose. After she was gone, everything changed. Father turned more to the Bible and the bottle, often in the same evening. The farm started failing. My sisters and I tried to keep things going, but—" She shrugged, the gesture containing all the helplessness she'd felt watching her family's slow decline. "When the bank threatened foreclosure, I took the job at the Silver Dollar. It paid better than sewing or laundry." "And your father disowned you for it," Xavier finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The irony is that he happily used my sinful wages to pay the mortgage for 3 months," Rose said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "It was only when people from his church saw me working there that he decided I was beyond redemption." Xavier reached out, hesitated, then gently placed his unbandaged hand over hers. "Some men use faith to lift others up. Others use it as a club to beat them down." "Sounds like your father was the latter sort." Rose didn't pull away from his touch. "Yes, though it wasn't always that way. Before Mother died, he was stern but fair. After—" She shook her head. "It's as if grief poisoned whatever goodness was in him." "Grief affects men differently," Xavier said thoughtfully. "Some turn hard like your father, others run from it, never staying in one place long enough for the pain to catch them." Something in his tone made Rose wonder if he spoke from personal experience. "And some," she said softly, "build new lives like you're doing here." His blue eyes met hers again, searching. "Like we're doing here, Rose." The simple inclusion, the "we" instead of "I," sent an unexpected thrill through her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that this was more than an employment arrangement, that she was truly helping to build something permanent with this quiet, thoughtful man. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Xavier cleared his throat and withdrew his hand. "It's getting late. I should see to the cattle before turning in." Rose nodded, feeling strangely bereft at the loss of his touch. "Of course, I'll leave a lamp burning for you." As she watched him don his coat and hat and step out into the chilly November night, Rose acknowledged what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was developing feelings for Xavier Ironwood, feelings that went far beyond gratitude or the respect of employee for employer. And she had no idea what to do about it. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ranch in white before Thanksgiving. Rose woke to find the world transformed, the familiar landscape rendered new and pristine under its winter coat. She stood at her bedroom window, watching dawn break over the snow-covered fields when movement caught her eye. Xavier was already outside, trudging through knee-deep drifts toward the barn, a lantern swinging from his hand. Even from a distance, she could see the determination in his stride as he forced a path through the snow. Rose dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and hurried downstairs to stoke the fire and prepare a heartier than usual breakfast. By the time Xavier returned, stomping snow from his boots on the porch, she had coffee brewing, biscuits baking, and thick slices of ham sizzling in the skillet. "It's brutal out there," he announced as he entered, his cheeks and nose ruddy from cold. "Had to break ice on the water troughs. Cattle are huddled in the lee of the barn, but they'll need extra feed to keep warm in this. Breakfast will be ready soon," Rose promised. "There's coffee now, though." Xavier gratefully accepted the steaming mug she offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Such momentary contacts had become increasingly common between them, each one sending a similar flutter through Rose's chest. "You're a godsend on mornings like this," he said, cupping the mug in his reddened hands. "My mother used to say that hot coffee on a cold day was proof that God loved cowboys." Rose smiled, pleased by the rare mention of his family. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was," he agreed, a shadow crossing his face. "Lost her when I was 16. Fever took her quick." "I'm sorry," Rose said, understanding all too well the pain of losing a mother. Xavier shrugged, the gesture containing years of compressed grief. "It was a long time ago. My father followed her 3 years later, thrown from a horse, and broke his neck." He took a long sip of coffee. "That's when I started drifting. Nothing to keep me in Texas anymore." Rose set a plate before him: biscuits, ham, fried eggs, and gravy. "And your promise to put down roots. Was that to your parents?" Xavier looked surprised, then thoughtful. "No, that came later. There was a man who took me in during my first winter alone, a rancher up in Wyoming. Old fellow, no family left, taught me most of what I know about cattle." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Before he passed, he made me promise I wouldn't spend my whole life drifting. Said a man needs his own land under his feet eventually." "And so here you are," Rose said softly. Xavier met her gaze. "Here we are," he corrected, echoing his words from weeks earlier. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. Both of them startled visitors were rare at the ranch, especially in weather like this. Xavier rose, hand instinctively moving to the revolver he wore even in the house. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the door. Rose heard the creak of hinges, followed by a man's voice she didn't recognize. "Mr. Ironwood, got a telegram for you from Denver. Station master said it was urgent." There was the sound of paper rustling, then Xavier's voice. "Thank you for bringing it out in this weather. There's coffee inside if you need warming before heading back." "Much obliged, but I best get on. Got more deliveries to make before this snow gets worse." The door closed, and Xavier returned to the kitchen, his expression grave as he studied the telegram in his hand. "Bad news?" Rose asked, anxiety rising at his somber demeanor. Xavier handed her the paper without comment. The message was brief. "Xavier Ironwood stop father critically ill stop return immediately stop Robert Ironwood stop." Rose looked up, confusion plain on her face. "But you said your father died years ago." "Not my birth father," Xavier clarified, sinking back into his chair. "Robert Ironwood, the rancher I told you about. He legally adopted me before he died. Or," he gestured to the telegram, "before I thought he died." "You took his name," Rose realized. Xavier nodded. "I was born Xavier Jones. When Robert adopted me, I became an Ironwood." He ran a hand through his hair, looking more unsettled than Rose had ever seen him. "I buried him 5 years ago, or at least I thought I did. Could there be a mistake? Another Robert Ironwood? Unlikely. He knew where to find me. This telegram came through the Central City office. I only established that address when I bought this place." Xavier stood suddenly. "I need to go to Denver. Now, in this snow." Rose couldn't hide her concern. "As soon as I can get a horse saddled. The stage won't run in this weather and I can't wait." His expression was resolute. "If he's alive, if I didn't bury my adoptive father, I need to know why." Rose wanted to argue, to point out the dangers of traveling alone in a snowstorm, but she recognized the determination in his eyes. This was something he needed to do. "How long will you be gone?" she asked instead. "A few days to reach Denver in this weather. After that," he shrugged, "I don't know what I'll find there." The unspoken question hung between them. What would this mean for the ranch? For them? "I'll look after things here," Rose promised. "The cattle, the house, everything will be waiting when you return." Xavier's expression softened. "I know you will." He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry to leave you alone like this." "I've managed alone before," Rose assured him, though the prospect of days in the isolated homestead without him filled her with a loneliness she hadn't anticipated. Within the hour, Xavier had packed a small bag, bundled up against the cold, and prepared his strongest horse for the journey. Rose stood on the porch, hugging herself against the biting wind as he made final adjustments to the saddle. "There's food in your saddlebags," she said. "Enough for 3 days if you're careful with it." Xavier nodded, turning to face her. For a moment, he looked as if he wanted to say something more, something beyond the practical matters of his departure. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you, Rose." "Be safe," she replied, her voice nearly carried away by the wind. "Come back." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that belied the frigid air around them. "I will, I promise." Then he was mounted and riding away, a solitary figure growing smaller against the vast white landscape until he disappeared entirely, leaving Rose alone with the howling wind and a house that suddenly felt much emptier than it had an hour before. The days after Xavier's departure passed with agonizing slowness. Rose threw herself into caring for the ranch, breaking ice on water troughs morning and evening, distributing feed to the cattle, maintaining fires in both the kitchen stove and the parlor fireplace to keep the house from freezing. Each night she fell into bed exhausted, her hands raw from cold and work, yet sleep came fitfully. She found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats, for Xavier's boots on the porch, for any sign of his return. On the 5th day, as Rose was hauling firewood from the stack behind the house, she heard the unmistakable rumble of wagon wheels approaching. Her heart leapt, but she tempered her excitement. Xavier had departed on horseback, not by wagon. Setting down her armload of wood, Rose shaded her eyes against the winter sun and peered down the long drive. A wagon was indeed approaching, but as it drew nearer, she recognized not Xavier but the round figure of Mrs. Peterson, the mercantile owner's wife from Central City. Rose hurried to meet the wagon as it pulled up before the house. "Mrs. Peterson, what brings you out in this weather?" The older woman climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her size. "Thought you might be needing supplies, with Mr. Ironwood away and all." She eyed Rose appraisingly. "And by the look of you, I was right. You're working yourself to the bone, girl." Rose self-consciously touched her hair, aware she must look a fright after days of ranch work. "How did you know Xavier was away?" "Small town," Mrs. Peterson replied simply. "Telegraph operator mentioned Mr. Ironwood had received urgent news and left for Denver. With this weather, I figured you might be running low on essentials." She gestured to the wagon, loaded with barrels and crates. "Brought flour, sugar, coffee, some preserved meats, and a few other necessities." Overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness, Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's very thoughtful, Mrs. Peterson, but I'm not sure I can pay for all this until Xavier returns." The older woman waved away her concern. "Mr. Ironwood has credit at the store. Samuel, that's Mr. Peterson, said to put it on his account." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Besides, I was curious to see how you were faring out here. There's been talk in town, you know." Rose stiffened. "Talk about you and Mr. Ironwood living out here together." Mrs. Peterson's eyes held no judgment, only curiosity. "Some say it's not proper, despite him claiming you're just his housekeeper." "That's exactly what I am," Rose insisted, though the words tasted hollow on her tongue. She was more than a housekeeper. Now she was the caretaker of Xavier's dream, his partner in building this place, even if their arrangement remained strictly professional. Mrs. Peterson studied her knowingly. "If you say so, dear, now let's get these supplies inside. It'll be dark soon, and Samuel will worry if I'm not back by sundown." Together, they unloaded the wagon, storing the provisions in the pantry. As they worked, Mrs. Peterson kept up a steady stream of town gossip, which Rose found herself hungrily absorbing after days of isolation. "Your sisters are well," the older woman mentioned casually as they arranged cans on a shelf. "Saw them at church on Sunday. Emma's wedding preparations continue apace. She'll be Mrs. Henry Wilson come spring, as planned." Rose's hands stilled, and Sarah quiet as ever. Seems to miss you, though she doesn't say so directly. Your father forbids your name from being spoken in the house, according to my Judith, who helps with the Wilson family's laundry and hears things." A familiar pain twisted in Rose's chest. "I expected as much, Mrs." Peterson placed a gentle hand on Rose's arm. "Not everyone in town shares your father's view, you know. Many folks were shocked by how he treated you that day, and Mr. Ironwood earned considerable respect for standing up to him." He did. Rose hadn't considered how the town might view Xavier's intervention. Indeed, a man who defends a woman's honor publicly is either a fool or a gentleman. Mr. Ironwood has proven himself firmly the latter since arriving in our community. Mrs. Peterson glanced around the now ordered kitchen. "And it seems he's treated you well here." "He has," Rose confirmed softly. "Better than I deserved." "Nonsense," the older woman scoffed. "You deserve every kindness, Rose Everhart. Don't let your father's cruelty convince you otherwise." She bustled to the door, donning her heavy coat and gloves. "Now I must be going. Is there anything else you need before I leave?" Rose hesitated, then asked. "Have you heard anything from Denver, about Xavier, I mean?" Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "Nothing specific, just that he was called away urgently." She studied Rose's anxious expression. "You care for him, don't you?" Unable to deny it, Rose nodded. "I do, more than I should, perhaps." The older woman smiled kindly. "The heart wants what it wants, dear, and from what I've observed of Mr. Ironwood, you could do far worse." She patted Rose's cheek. "He'll return." Men like that keep their promises. After Mrs. Peterson's departure, the house felt less lonely somehow. Perhaps it was the knowledge that not everyone in town condemned her, or perhaps it was simply having spoken to another human after days of silence. Whatever the reason, Rose found herself moving through her evening chores with renewed energy. That night, as she sat by the fire darning one of Xavier's shirts work that felt intimate in a way that made her cheeks warm, Rose allowed herself to acknowledge the truth Mrs. Peterson had so easily discerned. She was falling in love with Xavier Ironwood. The realization should have frightened her, given their circumstances, but instead it settled in her heart like a long-held secret finally brought to light. The question remained, did he feel anything similar for her? And what would happen when he returned from Denver with whatever truths he discovered there? Rose had just finished securing the cattle for the night on the 10th day of Xavier's absence. When she heard the sound, she'd been waiting for hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town. Heart racing, she hurried from the barn to the front of the house where she could see the road. The winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Against this backdrop, a single rider approached, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Xavier had returned. Rose smoothed her hair and brushed straw from her skirt, suddenly conscious of her appearance after days of ranch work. She had just reached the porch when Xavier rode into the yard, his horse moving wearily beneath him. "Xavier." She called, unable to contain her relief at seeing him safe. He looked up, and even from yards away, Rose could see the exhaustion etched in his features. But his eyes brightened at the sight of her, and the smile that crossed his face sent warmth flooding through her despite the cold. "Rose," he said, dismounting stiffly. He looked as if he'd ridden hard and long, his clothes travel-worn, his face bearing several days' growth of beard. She hurried down the steps to meet him. "You're back. Are you all right?" "Was your father, let me see to my horse first," Xavier interrupted gently. "Then I'll tell you everything." Rose nodded, understanding the priorities of a rancher. "Of course, there's stew keeping warm on the stove, and I can heat water for a bath if you'd like." Gratitude filled his tired eyes. A hot meal and a bath sound like heaven after the trail. While Xavier tended to his horse, Rose bustled about the kitchen, adding wood to the stove, ladling stew into a bowl, and slicing fresh bread. She set a pot of water to heat and laid out clean towels in his bedroom. By the time he entered the house, stomping snow from his boots, she had a place set for him at the table and was pouring coffee into his mug. "The ranch looks well tended," he remarked, removing his coat and hat. "Better than I expected after such weather." "The cattle are fine," Rose assured him. "A bit irritable with the cold, but healthy." Mrs. Peterson brought supplies from town a few days ago. Xavier raised an eyebrow as he sank into his chair. Did she now? That was kind of her. She said you had credit at the store, Rose explained, setting the bowl of stew before him. She also brought town gossip, which was almost as welcome as the flour and coffee. A small smile crossed Xavier's face as he picked up his spoon. I can imagine, it's been lonely out here for you. I managed, Rose said simply, taking the seat across from him, but yes, it was quiet without you. He looked up from his food, something unreadable in his expression. I missed you too, Rose. The simple admission sent her pulse racing, but she forced herself to focus on more pressing matters. Your father, was he truly alive? Xavier's expression sobered. He was, just barely when I arrived. He took a long sip of coffee before continuing. It's a complicated story. The man I buried 5 years ago wasn't Robert at all, but his foreman. They were similar in build, and the body was not in good condition when found. There had been a fire at a line shack. Everyone assumed it was Robert. But it wasn't, Rose said. Xavier shook his head. Robert was thrown from his horse that same day, miles from the shack, suffered a head injury that left him unconscious and later without memory. He was found by a traveling doctor who took him to Denver, where he's been living all this time, working odd jobs, going by the name John Smith because he couldn't remember who he was. How did he finally remember? He didn't, not completely. But he had a pocket watch with his initials and the deed to the Wyoming ranch in his possessions. A lawyer he consulted managed to piece together his identity and sent inquiries to various land offices where Ironwood property had been registered. When my name came up as purchasing this ranch. They connected the dots, Rose finished. Xavier nodded. By the time I reached Denver, he was dying for real this time, pneumonia like your mother. His voice gentled at the mention of her loss. But he recognized me, Rose, called me son one last time. Oh, Xavier, Rose reached across the table to take his hand. I'm so sorry, to find him only to lose him again. His fingers tightened around hers. Don't be, I'm grateful for those final days. We talked when he was lucid. I told him about this place, about the plans I have for it. He paused, his blue eyes holding hers. About you, Rose's breath caught. Me, he made me promise something at the end, Xavier continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. He said, don't let the good ones get away, boy. Life's too short for that mistake. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. And what did you tell him? Rose asked softly. I told him I'd already learned that lesson, watching my father throw away his happiness after my mother died. Xavier's gaze was unwavering. I told him I wouldn't make the same mistake. Rose could barely breathe, afraid to hope that his words meant what she thought they might. Xavier, let me finish my meal and have that bath, he interrupted gently. Then we need to talk, Rose. There are things I should have said before I left. She nodded, withdrawing her hand reluctantly. The water should be hot by now. I'll prepare your bath while you eat. As she busied herself with the practical task of filling the metal tub in his bedroom, Rose's mind whirled with possibilities. What did Xavier want to tell her? And why did his eyes hold such intensity when he spoke of not letting good things get away? By the time she returned to the kitchen, Xavier had finished his meal and was staring thoughtfully into his coffee cup. Your bath is ready, she said, hovering in the doorway. He looked up, the exhaustion in his face softened now by food and warmth. Thank you, Rose, for everything. The ranch looks better than I left it, which I wouldn't have thought possible given the weather. It's my home too, she said simply. Of course I'd care for it. Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Yes, he agreed. It is your home. Later that evening, after Xavier had bathed and changed into clean clothes, Rose sat in the parlor mending by lamplight. She had deliberately given him space, allowing him time to rest after his journey. But her fingers trembled slightly with anticipation of the conversation he had promised. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs made her look up. He appeared in the doorway, freshly shaved, his damp hair combed back from his forehead. In clean clothes and without the trail dust, he looked more like himself, though a new gravity lingered in his eyes. May I join you? He asked. Rose set aside her mending. Of course. Instead of taking the chair across from her, Xavier sat beside her on the small sofa close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. "While I was in Denver," he began without preamble, "I had a lot of time to think about this place. About my plans for it." He paused, his gaze steady on her face. "About us," Rose's pulse quickened. "Us? When I hired you as my housekeeper, I had practical reasons. You needed a place to stay, and I needed help with the house." A small smile touched his lips. "But if I'm being honest, there was more to it even then. Something about you called to me, Rose. Something in your spirit, the way you stood up again after your father threw you to the dust." Rose remembered that day with painful clarity, the humiliation, the despair, and then Xavier's strong hand helping her to her feet. "I told myself I was just being kind," he continued. "That offering you a position here was the decent thing to do. But these past weeks, watching you turn this house into a home, seeing your strength as you faced each day's challenges." He shook his head slightly. "I've come to care for you as much more than my housekeeper." Hope bloomed in Rose's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Xavier, let me finish," he said gently. "Sitting by my adoptive father's deathbed, watching another good man leave this world, it clarified things for me. Life is short and uncertain. We don't know how many days we have." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "I don't want to waste another day pretending my feelings for you are anything less than what they are." "And what are they?" Rose asked, barely above a whisper. Xavier's blue eyes held hers, open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I love you, Rose Everhart. I think I started falling in love with you that very first day in Central City, when you showed more dignity being thrown in the dust than most people manage in a lifetime of standing tall." Joy surged through Rose, so powerful she felt light-headed with it. "I love you too," she said, the words rushing out as if they'd been waiting at the edge of her lips for weeks. "I've tried not to. I told myself it was inappropriate that I was just your employee, that you couldn't possibly see me as anything more." "You've never been just an employee to me," Xavier said, his free hand rising to gently touch her cheek. "You've been my partner in building this place and making it a home. You've been the first person I think about when I wake and the last before I sleep." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I want you to stay, Rose, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife if you'll have me." Tears filled Rose's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "Are you certain? People will talk. They'll say you only married me because—" "Let them talk," Xavier interrupted firmly. "I don't care what anyone in Central City or anywhere else thinks. I care about you, about us, about the life we could build together here." Rose looked into his earnest face and saw everything she'd ever wanted: respect, partnership, love. "Yes," she said, her voice steadying with certainty. "Yes, I'll marry you, Xavier." His smile was radiant as he drew her closer. "May I kiss you, Rose?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. In answer, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle pressure at first, then with growing passion as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, as if promising to never let her fall again. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that day in town," he murmured. "Your father threw you to the dust, but I'll spend the rest of my life lifting you from it." Rose's heart swelled with love and gratitude. "You already have," she whispered, "in more ways than you know." Spring came to Colorado with its usual capricious nature: warm, sunny days followed by sudden snowstorms that melted almost as quickly as they arrived. By late April, the land around the Ironwood ranch had transformed from winter's stark white to vibrant green, dotted with early wildflowers. Rose stood on the front porch, watching as Xavier directed two hired hands in the construction of a new corral. The ranch had prospered in the months since his proposal. The cattle had weathered the winter well. Calving season had been successful, and Xavier had been able to hire permanent help as he'd planned. She touched the simple gold band on her left hand, still not entirely accustomed to its presence after 2 months of marriage. They had wed in February in a small ceremony at the home of Mrs. Peterson, who had appointed herself Rose's champion in town. The mercantile owner's wife had insisted on hosting, declaring that Rose deserved a proper wedding surrounded by people who cared for her. To Rose's surprise and joy, both her sisters had attended, defying their father's prohibition. Emma, already in the final stages of preparation for her own wedding, had embraced Rose tearfully, whispering, "I've missed you so much." Sarah, quieter but no less emotional, had simply held on to Rose for long moments, unable to speak through her tears. Their father had not come, of course. Rose had expected nothing else, yet his absence had still cast a small shadow over her happiness, not because she missed him, but because his stubbornness kept her sisters divided between two worlds. Xavier had seemed to sense her thoughts that day, taking her hand as they exchanged vows and squeezing it gently in reassurance. "You have family now," he had whispered. "Me, always." The memory warmed her as she watched him work, his strength and confidence evident in every movement. Marriage had changed things between them in wonderful ways. The tentative feelings that had grown during her time as his housekeeper had blossomed into deep, abiding love once they were free to express them openly. Their life together was not without challenges. Running a ranch demanded constant work and attention, and the harsh realities of frontier life didn't disappear simply because they were in love. But they faced each difficulty together, their partnership stronger for the trials they overcame. Rose was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Xavier approaching until he was climbing the porch steps, a smile lighting his face at the sight of her. "What has you looking so contemplative, Mrs. Ironwood?" he asked, removing his gloves and hat as he reached her. The name still sent a thrill through her. "Just thinking about how much has changed since last autumn," she replied, accepting his quick kiss. Xavier leaned against the porch railing beside her, following her gaze to the bustling activity of the ranch. "For the better, I hope." "Infinitely better," she assured him, leaning against his solid warmth. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "The new hands are working out well. Thompson knows cattle better than most men I've worked with, and Miller's a decent carpenter. That new corral should be finished by week's end." "Just in time for the cattle drive to Denver," Rose noted. Xavier nodded. "I'll only be gone a week, 10 days at most. Think you can manage without me that long?" There was teasing in his tone, but Rose caught the genuine concern beneath it. This would be their first separation since their marriage, and while she was fully capable of overseeing the ranch in his absence, she'd proven that during his trip to Denver, they had grown so accustomed to each other's presence that any parting would be difficult. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Besides, Sarah's coming to stay while Emma and Henry are on their wedding trip. It will be good to have time with her without Emma's wedding preparations dominating every conversation." Xavier's expression softened at the mention of her younger sister. "I'm glad you'll have company. And I'm even more glad your sisters have found ways to remain in your life, despite your father." "They are both of age now," Rose said. "Emma through marriage and Sarah turned 18 last month. Father can't forbid them from seeing me anymore, not legally." "Still takes courage to defy him," Xavier observed. "Your sisters have Everhart spirit, just like their older sister." Rose smiled at the compliment. "Speaking of spirit, Mrs. Peterson mentioned something interesting when I was in town yesterday. Apparently, Father has been asking questions about the ranch, how we're faring, whether the cattle survived the winter, that sort of thing." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Has he now? That's unexpected. I thought so too." Rose had been shocked when Mrs. Peterson relayed this information. Her father had not spoken a word to or about her since that day in the street, as far as she knew. "Mrs. Peterson thinks he's too proud to approach directly, but might be having second thoughts about cutting me off completely." "What do you think?" Xavier asked, studying her face. Rose considered the question carefully. I think he's lonely. Emma's married and gone to Denver with Henry. Sarah will likely marry within the year. She has no shortage of suitors now that she's of age. The ranch is failing. Everyone in town knows he'll lose it by winter if things don't improve." She sighed. "And I think he's too stubborn to admit he was wrong, but perhaps not too stubborn to wonder if he made a mistake." Xavier was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Would you want to reconcile with him if he were willing? It was a question Rose had asked herself repeatedly since Mrs. Peterson's revelation. Not for my sake, she said finally. He hurt me deeply, and I've made my peace with that. But for my sister's sake, so they don't have to choose between their father and their sister, yes, I would consider it. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. He hesitated, then added, though I'll admit, the thought of facing the man who threw my wife to the dust doesn't fill me with charitable feelings. Rose laughed softly, leaning up to kiss his cheek. My protective cowboy. Always, he promised, turning to capture her lips in a more thorough kiss. When they separated, Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I have something to tell you, she said after a moment. Something important. Xavier tensed slightly. Is everything all right? Rose lifted her head to meet his concerned gaze, a smile spreading across her face. More than all right. I visited Dr. Matthews while I was in town yesterday. She took a deep breath, joy bubbling up inside her. We're going to have a baby, Xavier, in late November, he thinks. For a moment, Xavier simply stared at her, shock evident in his features. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the men working in the yard, he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle. A baby, he repeated as he set her down gently. We're having a baby. Rose nodded, laughing at his exuberance. I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before telling you. Xavier placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. A child, our child. He looked up at her, his expression suddenly serious. I love you, Rose. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you, she replied, covering his hand with her own. Our family is growing just like our ranch. As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built together, both literally and figuratively, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the dust of Central City's Main Street to the promise of new life growing within her, every step had led to this abundance of joy and love. Xavier seemed to follow her thoughts, as he so often did. When I first saw your father throw you down that day, he said softly, I never imagined where helping you up would lead us. To the stars, Rose murmured, remembering something her mother used to say. Sometimes we have to touch the dust before we can reach the stars. Xavier smiled, drawing her close again. Then I'm grateful for that day, for everything that brought you to me. As the spring breeze carried the scent of new growth and promise across their land, Rose closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. Her father had thrown her to the dust, yes. But Xavier had lifted her from it, and together, they had built something far more precious than either could have created alone. November brought early snow and bitter cold to Colorado, transforming the landscape once again into a pristine white wonderland. Inside the Ironwood ranch house, however, warmth and anticipation filled every corner. Rose sat in the rocking chair Xavier had crafted for her, her hands resting on her swollen belly as she watched the snow fall outside the parlor window. According to Dr. Matthews, the baby could arrive any day now, a fact that filled her with equal parts excitement and trepidation. The ranch had prospered through the summer and fall. Xavier's cattle drive to Denver had been successful, bringing in enough money to expand their herd and make further improvements to the property. They had added 2 rooms to the house, a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, and a larger kitchen that Rose had designed herself. The sound of the front door opening drew Rose from her thoughts. Xavier entered, stomping snow from his boots and removing his heavy coat. Still snowing, he announced unnecessarily, crossing to warm his hands by the fire. Thompson and Miller have the cattle secure in the north pasture shelter. They should be fine unless the storm worsens. Rose smiled at her husband's perpetual concern for his animals. And you? Are you frozen solid? Xavier chuckled, coming to kneel beside her chair. Nothing a warm fire and my wife's company can't cure. He placed a gentle hand on her belly. How are you feeling today? Restless, Rose admitted. I can't get comfortable, and the baby has been especially active since morning. Xavier's face lit up as he felt a strong kick against his palm. After 9 months, his wonder at these movements had not diminished in the slightest. Strong like his mother, he commented. Or her father, Rose countered with a smile. They had chosen not to predict whether they would have a son or daughter, agreeing that either would be equally welcome. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Xavier frowned, rising to his feet. Who would be out in this weather? He crossed to the door and opened it, revealing Sarah Everhart standing on the porch, snow dusting her dark cloak. Sarah, Rose exclaimed, struggling to her feet. What are you doing here? How did you get through the storm? Her younger sister hurried inside, allowing Xavier to take her snow-covered cloak. Mr. Wilson drove me in his enclosed carriage. He's taking it to the barn now to shelter the horses until the weather clears. She crossed to embrace Rose awkwardly around her belly. I had to come. Father is ill, very ill. Dr. Matthews says it's his heart. Rose felt a pang of concern despite everything. How bad is it? Bad enough that he's asking for you, Sarah replied, her expression grave. He may not have much time left. Xavier and Rose exchanged glances. For months, there had been small signs of her father's softening stance, inquiries about the ranch, subtle messages delivered through Emma or Sarah, but no direct communication. Now, facing his mortality, it seemed Joseph Everhart was finally ready to extend an olive branch. I can't travel in my condition, Rose said, distress evident in her voice. The baby could come any day. I know, Sarah said quickly. That's why Father asked if he might come here, to see you one last time and to meet Xavier properly. She glanced at Xavier, uncertainty in her eyes. He wishes to make amends if you'll allow it. Xavier's jaw tightened momentarily, but his expression remained neutral as he looked to Rose. It's your decision, he said quietly. This is your home. If you want to see him, I'll abide by your wishes. Rose considered the situation carefully. Her relationship with her father had been complicated even before that fateful day in Central City. He had been strict but not unkind during her childhood, and she had loved him despite his flaws. After her mother's death, his descent into bitterness had been painful to witness and to endure. Yet the prospect of him dying without reconciliation weighed heavily on her heart. Yes, she said finally, tell him he can come, tomorrow if the weather permits. She looked to Xavier, finding reassurance in his steady gaze. We'll face him together. The following day dawned clear and cold, the storm having moved eastward overnight. By mid-morning, a carriage appeared on the horizon, making its way slowly through the snow-covered landscape toward the ranch house. Rose watched from the window, anxiety knotting her stomach, or perhaps it was the baby, sensing her tension. Xavier stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Are you sure about this? He asked softly. It's not too late to change your mind. Rose covered his hand with her own. I'm sure, whatever happens, we'll weather it together. The carriage pulled up before the house, and Mr. Wilson, the banker, emerged first. He helped Joseph Everhart down carefully. Rose's breath caught at the sight of her father. In the 9 months since she'd last seen him, he had aged decades. His tall frame was stooped now, his face gaunt, his once dark hair completely white. Xavier squeezed her shoulder gently, then moved to open the door. Rose remained standing by the fire, one hand braced against the mantel for support, the other cradling her belly. Heavy footsteps in the entryway, murmured voices. And then her father appeared in the parlor doorway, leaning heavily on a cane. His eyes immediately found hers, and Rose saw something she had never expected to see there. Regret. Rose, he said, his voice weaker than she remembered. You look like your mother. The comparison, meant as a compliment, she knew brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Father, she acknowledged, neither warm nor cold. Xavier entered behind him, his posture tense but his manner courteous. Mr. Everhart, please sit. You must be tired from your journey. Joseph Everhart nodded gratefully, lowering himself into the chair Xavier indicated. An awkward silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Your home is impressive, Joseph said finally, glancing around the well-appointed parlor. I understand the ranch has prospered under your management. We've been blessed, Xavier replied neutrally. Another silence stretched between them. Rose could see her father struggling to find words, something she'd never witnessed before. Joseph Everhart had always been certain of his opinions, quick to express them, and unyielding in his judgments. "I was wrong," he said suddenly, the words seeming to burst from him. "What I did to you, Rose, how I treated you, it was wrong." He looked down at his gnarled hands. "I've had a lot of time to think these past months about the kind of father I was, the kind of man I became after your mother died." Rose felt tears threatening again but held them back. "You were grieving," she said softly. "We all were." Joseph shook his head. "Grief is no excuse for cruelty. I drove you away when I should have been grateful for your help. I chose pride over family." He looked up, his eyes finding Xavier. "And I judged you unfairly, Mr. Ironwood. I see now that you're a good man who has given my daughter the respect and care she deserves." Xavier's stance relaxed slightly. "I love your daughter, sir. Everything I have, everything we've built here, it's as much her doing as mine." "I can see that," Joseph acknowledged. "You've created something remarkable together." His gaze returned to Rose, lingering on her swollen belly, "And soon you'll have a new blessing to share." Rose instinctively placed a protective hand over her unborn child. "Yes." "I don't expect your forgiveness," her father continued. "I haven't earned it, but I hoped we might make peace before," he broke off, a rattling cough overtaking him. Xavier quickly poured a glass of water and offered it to the older man. Joseph accepted it with a grateful nod, sipping slowly until the coughing subsided. "The doctor doesn't give me long," he said once he could speak again. "My heart is failing. It might be weeks, it might be days." He set the glass down with a shaking hand. "I didn't want to leave this world with things unsettled between us." Rose felt a familiar ache in her chest, the complicated grief of loving someone who had hurt her deeply. "I don't hate you, Father," she said quietly. "I never did. I was angry and hurt, but I never hated you." Relief washed over Joseph's haggard face. "You have your mother's capacity for forgiveness. I never deserved either of you." A sudden sharp pain gripped Rose's abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch the mantle more tightly. Xavier was at her side instantly. "Rose, what is it?" She took a deep breath as the pain subsided. "Nothing, just the baby moving." But even as she said it, she felt a warm rush of fluid down her legs. Xavier's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "The baby, it's coming." Joseph half rose from his chair in alarm. "Now." "Should I fetch the doctor?" "There's no time," Rose said, another contraction already building. "Dr. Matthews said the roads might be impassable after the snow. He left instructions with Sarah just in case." Xavier's face paled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'll get Sarah." He helped Rose to a seat before hurrying from the room. Left alone with her father, Rose breathed through another contraction, acutely aware of his concerned gaze. "Your mother would be proud of you," Joseph said softly. "She always said you had the strongest spirit of all her daughters." Rose managed a small smile through her discomfort. "She said the same about you, that your spirit was what drew her to you, though your stubbornness nearly drove her away." A ghost of a smile touched Joseph's lips. "She wasn't wrong." He hesitated, then added, "I see her in you now. Not just in your face, but in the home you've created, the life you've built despite everything." Before Rose could respond, Xavier returned with Sarah, who immediately took charge with surprising authority. "We need to get her upstairs," she instructed. "Xavier, carry her if you can." "Father, there's hot water on the stove. Bring it up when it's ready." To Rose's amazement, her stern, Bible-quoting father simply nodded and moved to do as he was told. Xavier lifted her carefully, his strong arms cradling her as if she were made of glass. "I've got you," he murmured as he carried her upstairs. "I've got you both." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Rose. Sarah proved to be a capable midwife, having assisted at several births in town. Xavier remained by Rose's side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when the pain seemed unbearable. Most surprising of all was her father, who shuttled back and forth with hot water and clean linens, his earlier frailty seemingly forgotten in the crisis. As the afternoon waned and evening approached, Rose's labor intensified. "Push now," Sarah instructed, her young face serious with concentration. "The baby's almost here." Rose gathered her remaining strength, gripping Xavier's hand so tightly she feared she might break his fingers. With a final, tremendous effort, she felt the baby slip from her body, followed by an instant of silence that stretched like eternity. Then a strong, indignant cry filled the room. "A girl," Sarah announced joyfully. "A perfect little girl." Xavier's face transformed with wonder as Sarah quickly cleaned the infant and placed her in Rose's arms. Tears streamed unashamedly down his cheeks as he gazed at his daughter. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." Rose counted 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes, marveling at the tiny human they had created together. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." A movement at the doorway caught her attention. Her father stood there, leaning heavily on his cane, uncertainty in his posture. "Father," Rose called softly, "come meet your granddaughter." Joseph approached cautiously, as if afraid he might be turned away. When he reached the bedside and looked down at the infant, his weathered face softened in a way Rose hadn't seen since her childhood. "She has the Everhart chin," he observed, his voice thick with emotion. "And the Ironwood eyes, I think," Rose added, noting the deep blue of her daughter's gaze. Xavier placed a gentle hand on the baby's head. "What shall we call her?" Rose looked from her daughter to her father, then back to her husband. In that moment, she felt the circle of their family closing past hurts healing, new bonds forming, life continuing in this precious new being. "Eleanor," she decided. After my mother, Joseph made a small sound that might have been a suppressed sob. "She would be honored," he said quietly. "Eleanor Rose Ironwood," Xavier pronounced, testing the name. "It's perfect." As twilight descended over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fresh snow outside, Rose felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun in the dust of Central City's Main Street had led here to this room, this family, this moment of grace. Her father's cruel actions had set her on a path she'd never anticipated, yet she couldn't regret it now, holding her daughter in her arms with Xavier beside her. From the ashes of one family, they had built another stronger, more loving, rooted in mutual respect and shared dreams. "Thank you," she whispered to Xavier, meeting his gaze over their daughter's head. "For what?" he asked, smoothing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "For lifting me from the dust," she replied simply. "For everything that followed." Xavier's eyes shone with understanding and love. "Always," he promised, bending to kiss first her forehead, then their daughter's. "Always." In the corner, Joseph Everhart watched his daughter and her family with quiet reverence, witnessing the love he had once tried to forbid. And in that peaceful moment, as snow fell softly outside and new life bloomed within, the circle of forgiveness, redemption, and love was complete. Spring returned to Colorado, bringing with it the 5th anniversary of Rose's arrival at what was now widely known as the Ironwood Ranch. The property had expanded considerably over the years, with additional acreage purchased from neighboring farms and the cattle herd grown to impressive size. The ranch house had expanded too, with several more rooms added to accommodate their growing family. Eleanor, now 4 years old, had been joined by a brother, Joseph Xavier, who had just celebrated his 2nd birthday. Rose's hand rested absently on her belly, where a 3rd Ironwood child was beginning to make its presence known, though she hadn't yet shared the news with anyone but Xavier. From the wide front porch, Rose watched as Xavier taught Eleanor to ride her new pony, a gentle creature selected specifically for its calm temperament. Their daughter sat tall in the small saddle, her dark hair so like Xavier's braided down her back, her blue eyes serious with concentration as she listened to her father's instructions. "Gentle with the reins, Ellie," Xavier called, leading the pony in a small circle. "Just like I showed you." "Like this, Papa?" Eleanor adjusted her small hands, mimicking her father's demonstration. "Perfect," Xavier praised, his face alight with pride. "You're a natural just like your mama." Rose smiled at the comparison. Though she had grown up around horses on her father's farm, she had never been the rider Xavier was. Still, she enjoyed watching him pass his skills to their daughter, who worshipped her father and wanted to be just like him in all things. Little Joseph played nearby, carefully supervised by Sarah, who had come to live with them permanently 3 years earlier. After their father's death just 2 months after Alina's birth, Sarah had found herself at loose ends. Emma was happily settled in Denver with her banker husband and growing family, but Sarah had never felt drawn to marriage despite numerous suitors. "I'd rather be useful," she had explained to Rose when proposing the arrangement. "I love the children, and you'll need help even more when the ranch expands." It had proven to be a perfect solution. Sarah had a natural way with children and a head for figures that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's increasingly complex accounts. She had grown from the quiet girl in their father's shadow to a confident young woman with her own purpose. "Aunt Sarah, look," Joseph called, proudly holding up a dandelion he had picked from the grass. "Yellow, very yellow," Sarah agreed solemnly. "Shall we find more for a bouquet for your mama?" As the little boy nodded enthusiastically, Rose felt a rush of gratitude for her sister's presence in their lives. The ranch had become a true family home, filled with love and laughter, everything she had dreamed of as a girl, but had feared might never be hers after that terrible day in Central City. Her father had been laid to rest beside her mother in the town cemetery, reconciled with Rose in his final weeks. Though the hurt he had caused could never be completely erased, forgiveness had brought peace to them both before the end. He had even altered his will, leaving his failing ranch to be divided between his 3 daughters, a gesture of contrition that had meant more than the property itself. Rose and Xavier had sold their portion to a young couple eager to revitalize the land, using the money to expand their own holdings. Emma had done the same, while Sarah had kept her share of the proceeds as a nest egg for her future. The sound of an approaching wagon drew Rose's attention to the road. A familiar conveyance appeared, bearing Mrs. Peterson and her husband from town. "Company coming," she called to Xavier, who looked up and waved acknowledgement. The Petersons had remained steadfast friends through the years. It was Mrs. Peterson who had first spread the word in Central City about the quality of Ironwood beef, helping to establish their reputation. It was also she who had stood as godmother to both Ironwood children, declaring herself their town grandmother since neither Rose nor Xavier had living parents. "Rose, my dear," Mrs. Peterson called as her husband brought the wagon to a stop. "We've brought the fabric you ordered for the new curtains and something special for the children." Xavier lifted Alina from her pony and set her on the ground. "Go greet Mr. and Mrs. Peterson properly," he instructed. "Then you can see what they've brought." As the children raced to the wagon with Sarah following at a more sedate pace, Xavier made his way to the porch, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "Successful riding lesson?" Rose asked as he joined her. "Very, she's fearless, that one." He slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her against his side. "Like her mother," Rose laughed softly. "I was never fearless." "No," Xavier raised an eyebrow. "The woman who took a job at a saloon to save her family's farm, who agreed to live alone with a strange cowboy miles from town, who faced down her father and built a new life from nothing. That doesn't sound fearless to you." Put that way, Rose had to admit he had a point. "Perhaps not entirely fearless," she conceded, "but I had help along the way." She looked up at him, taking in the face she had loved for 5 years now, the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his blue eyes that deepened when he smiled. "The best kind of help." Xavier's expression softened as he met her gaze. "I told you once that I'd lift you from the dust." "I meant it then and I mean it now. Whatever comes our way, Rose, we face it together." "Together," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Always." As they watched the Petersons distribute gifts to their delighted children, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the humiliation of that day in town to the joy and abundance that now filled their lives, every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to create this perfect moment. Her father had thrown her to the dust, yes. But Xavier had lifted her from it, and together, they had built something far more precious than either could have imagined that fateful day 5 years ago. A family bound by love, respect, and the promise of a future as wide open as the Colorado sky above them.